Huh? Yeah. Dorothy Mosher? Yeah, she's doing all right. Well, I guess before we get started this morning, I'll begin us with a word of prayer. Let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for allowing all of us to be able to come and meet here together to worship you in spirit and in truth and to study your word. Thank you for all that you've done for each of us this week, and please, Lord, be with us as we go throughout this day. Please help us to do everything that is pleasing in your sight. And in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So last week we finished up 2 chapters last week. You guys remember which chapters those were?
3 and 4.
2 Samuel 3 and 4. Alright, so somebody tell me before we get into chapter 5, what happened last time? What did we cover in chapter 4? It was what, 12 verses? We went through it real quick, but some good stuff happened in there. So in verses 1 through 4, we saw troubles in Saul's family, right? Yeah. Now we said Saul's family. Why? Even though he's dead, who is Saul's family we talked about? Ishbosheth and Jonathan's son. You remember we talked about Mephibosheth? Mephibosheth was the one who was his nurse. You know, when they found out, his caretaker, when they found out Saul had been killed in battle, and Jonathan had been too. You know, if you're the servant in the house and you're taking care of the kid, and you find out the king, his grandpa, and the prince, you know, his dad, you know, are dead, what are you going to do? Are you going to sit there and wait for the people who killed him to come?
Kill you.
Yeah, come kill you, or are you going to, you know, try to run? Well, that's what happened. You know, the caretaker tried to run, and then what happened?
She dropped the baby.
Yeah. I can't remember if it's a male or a female that took. That's why I keep saying the caretaker, or you know, it's like saying the baby. I can't remember if it's a male or female. We'll find out soon. But it's like if I tried to take off and run with little Trey there, and I was running for my life. You know, lots of stuff's going, you know, through my head. I'll be panicking or stuff. You know, I wouldn't want to, but it would be as if I tripped and fell and he went flying. How bad did Mephibosheth hit the ground?
Bad enough to land.
Bad enough to keep him, you know, to keep him injured for the rest of his life, right? Jonathan's son, exactly. And so, right, and so Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan. He was only 5 years old when the news came that Saul and Jonathan had been slain. So his nurse took him up to flee, but somehow she let him fall, and in the fall he was permanently injured. That's what this commentary said. So then verses 5 through 12, what did we see there? You guys remember Ishbosheth was killed, right? Mm-hmm. All right, who killed him?
I can't pronounce it.
Was it Rechab and Baanah?
There you go.
Who were they? They were brothers, but what position did they hold in Ishbosheth's army? Or
They would be captains, wouldn't they?
yeah. Now they got promoted because what happened? Who was above them? Abner, right?
Yeah. There was a name,
Yeah.
It wouldn't just come to my head.
Right. So there was Ishbosheth, then Abner, then Rechab and Baanah, or Baanah, however you want to say it. And why did they get promoted? Why did they replace Abner?
Because they was next in line.
Right. But what happened to Abner?
Abner got killed.
By who?
By Joab.
Joab. Who is Joab?
David's head honcho.
And also his
Brother,
nephew. Right. And exactly. So, what is that called? Nepotism. When somebody puts family into a position, right? David clearly shows nepotism and favoritism towards members of his family, because he and we're going to see that more throughout 2 Samuel, especially when it comes to Joab. Joab should have rightfully he should have been put to death many times, too many times. Like one time is okay, that's what the king wants to give him a second chance, but then the third and the fourth and the fifth, But we're going to see that. But Joab killed Abner, who was going to work with David to create a peace treaty to stop all this civil war between Israel and Judah, the north and the south. And Joab killed him, which moved Rechab and Baanah as the second in command, the second right next to Ishbosheth. And how did they kill Ishbosheth? They beheaded him, but did they just walk up to him and say, hey, we're going to be the kings? Or, hey, we want David to be the king? Did they straight up tell him that?
No, they waited till he was asleep.
Yeah. In his own bed, they went up and snuck up on him and cut his head off. And, I mean, that's messed up. Oh, hey, we're going to serve you. You're going to be our king. They're all lovey-dovey, sucking up to him while he's awake. And then as soon as he falls asleep and lets his guard down, they cut off his head. And then where'd they bring his head? Brought it to David, exactly. And what'd they say to David? Familiar story to us, right? Because what happened in the first chapter of this book of 2 Samuel? Yeah, and he brought Saul's jewelry. Said, hey, I killed the king so that you could be king. What do you give me? What did we see Rechab and Baanah do with Ishbosheth's head? Hey, I killed the king. What will you give me? I mean, that's just messed up. I mean, how had they clearly they should have? If anybody, they're not very far apart, and word spreads fast, especially amongst the Jews, in this area. They had to have heard what David did. Especially because David used that Amalekite as an example to others. His death as an example to others. We do not kill the king to make a new king. We don't do that. Surely they should have heard about that, but even if they did, they must have ignored it. So that was just dumb on their part. So okay, now that we caught up on all that, we move now to chapter 5. Okay, so I'm going to read verses 1 and 2 of chapter 5, and I got it up here on the screen here. So, in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. All right. Then came all the tribes of Israel to David unto Hebron, and spake, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh. Also in time past, when Saul was king over us, thou wast he that led us out and brought in Israel. And the Lord said to thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be a captain over Israel. Go ahead. Yeah.
So all the elders of Israel came to the king in Hebron, and King David made a league with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel. David was 30 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 40 years.
In Hebron he reigned over Judah 7 years and 6 months, and in Jerusalem he reigned 30 and 3 years over all Israel and Judah.
Okay, so let's look at David's. Hey, Joe. All right, so he was how old? Look at verses 4 and 5. He was how old when he started to rule? 30 years old. All right, so how long did he reign?
40 years.
For 40 years. All right, so how old was he when he died?
70.
Okay. All right, now, out of those 70 years, how long was he in each place?
7 years and 6 months in Jerusalem, and 30 and 3 years over Israel and Judah.
At right? All right, so in Hebron, is that in Judah or Jerusalem? We've talked, is it in the north or is it in the south? It's in the south, right? Judah. All right, because you guys remember the Israel, then Judah in the alphabet. Hey, let's see. So then how many other months or in years at Jerusalem?
30 and 3 years.
33. All right, at Jerusalem. All right, so there is David's kingship, his rule, his reign. If you guys are taking notes, that would be this is a good place to write down, like out in the margins or something, how many, this is the rule of David, his entire thing. That out of all the things that he did as king of this nation, of God's people, it all fit into these 40 years. And the chronology and the timetable and the timeline, it comes into play. We're going to see references to different things, and especially with David, because of so many, he appears so many times in scriptures. Sometimes it'll be here, and sometimes it'll be here. And we've seen that a little bit in First Samuel, and that was before all of this even counted, right? Because all of this is his rule. All of the stuff we've read before is him not being king. Everything in 1 Samuel is what I mean. He wasn't king yet. Okay, so basically what happened here in these first 5 verses? Some people come up to him and say what?
You're king.
We want you to be king. Okay, so let's make this thing official, right? Okay. Look at, let's see, 1 Chronicles 11, 1 through 3 mentions this as well. 11, 1 through 3. It says, Then Israel gathered themselves to David at Hebron, saying, Behold, we are thy bone and thy flesh, and moreover in time past, even when Saul was king, thou wast he that led us out and brought us in Israel. And the Lord thy God said unto thee, Thou shalt feed my people Israel, and thou shalt be ruler over my people. Therefore came the elders of Israel to the king at Hebron, and David made a covenant with them in Hebron before the Lord, and they anointed David king over Israel, according to the word of the Lord by Samuel. Okay, so that account in 1 Chronicles 11, it sounds like a direct copy, or pretty much the same thing that we just read here in 2 Samuel. Why would the Bible repeat this twice? Because it's important. And when were the books of Chronicles and Kings written? You guys remember, flash forward a couple hundred years to the captivity. What was the Babylonian captivity and the Assyrian captivity? The Jews were taken by people, right? In 721 BC, the Assyrians came and they took Israel, the nations to the north. Why did they take them first? Well, it's because the nations in the north had not been, the Jews in the north had not been as faithful as the ones in the south. Both of them were departing from the Lord, but Israel had completely, they went out of left field and then some. Judah, at least, was still in the ballpark. So in 721 BC, Assyria took the Jews into captivity. So now imagine all those Jews from the north, from the year 721, they're in captivity. I can't even say jail, because they're not in jail. They're being, this is a wholesale lifestyle. Like, they are now living in, hell on earth is how I'll describe it. From the year 721 on. Now the next captivity comes in the year 606. All right, how many years does it take to go from 721 down to 606? About 115 years, isn't it? 115 years, the nations to the north, they've still been in captivity. Assyria took them first, but then 115 years later, Assyria falls to, actually less than 115, but around that time, Assyria falls to a new nation called Babylon. Babylon sweeps in and defeats Assyria, takes all of its land, its possessions, its people, including who? the people, the Jews that had fallen captive, right? So now, not only do they take all the things that had been taken already to the north, now they sweep down and take Jerusalem. They take the nations to the south in Judah, because 115 years has gone by, and prophet after prophet have popped up and said, hey, we need to learn from the north's example and not be like them. We need to repent. But, of course, how many times do we see the Jews, do so well only to turn right around and mess up again? So around 606 BC, Babylon sweeps in and takes the rich people out of Jerusalem. He takes the royal people, the people that are potential leaders, and Babylon just takes them first. Well, a couple years later, in 597 years, BC, they come in and they take all the skilled workers. They take all the craftsmen. They take all of the people that are extremely useful and are good at making things. Why would they take them in the next wave? They can put them to work, right? I mean, if they're going to be slaves, and they're good laborers, you might as well have the best slave laborers, right? And so that, it's a pretty smart military tactic for them to take them. And then in 586 BC, as we're counting down closer and closer, 586, about 11 years later, they come back to Jerusalem and they take everyone else except for the poor and the sick and the lame. All right, so basically, in 3 different waves, they gut Jerusalem to the south. And so I say all that to paint the setting of how serious is this captivity. Does anybody remember, we talked about it before, how long the Babylonian captivity would last? They would get out in 536. So if we started in 606 and they get out in 536, how many years is in between here? 70, right? 70 years, just as prophesied. But if there was already people in 721 BC in the north, and they don't get out until 536, how long is in between here? Almost 200 years. That's about 185, right? 100. Which one would you rather be in if you had to choose? The 70, the 185, or the 0?
0.
Well, how do you get in the 0?
Being old and lame.
Be faithful. Yeah, this is what the prophets. This is what the prophets all this time, before Assyria, before Babylon, this is what the prophets kept saying, and the people, preaching God's message, were saying, "Hey, bad stuff's gonna happen. It's coming soon." The nations to the north didn't listen, so 185 years in captivity. How many generations is that without God? If a generation is anywhere between 10 and 20 years, 10, 15, 20 years, like that's a generation. How many potential generations are there? There's at least 9 if we go with 20 years, and there's 18 if we go with 10. So between 9 and 18 generations of people who were in captivity, completely away from God, His people, His places of worship. Now look over here in 70 years. How many generations is that? If we go with 20 years, that's at least 3.5 generations. If we go with 10 years, that's 7 generations. So anywhere between 3.5 and 7 generations. Now, over here, if you're faithful, how long will you be without God? You'll never be without God. No matter what happens to you, you're never without God. That's what they were trying to get people to understand over here. But, but people didn't want to listen. Now, why did we say all of that about the captivity? Well, it's because of this. Because of First Chronicles. We read from First Chronicles earlier. If all of these people had been in captivity for 185 years from the North group, and from the South group at least 70 years, no matter which group you're in, how many temples did they have? The temple when they were in captivity? No, they're in a whole other country. Did they have the means to worship God as they were supposed to be commanded? No. They didn't have it. They didn't have anything. They didn't even have clothes to wear. You imagine walking around for 185 years without clothes, eating your own feces, drinking your own urine?
Well, that's why they got sick, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, generation after generation. How often, if you're in a society, you think about societies, and think about just going back and not even being part of this group, but just looking at them. How when you look at a group like this, how faithful to God do you think they're going to be? Or do you think that they're going to be so worried about their day-to-day survival that they're just going to be worried about that more than even trying to be faithful to God? Yeah. And so the biggest point to the reason why they fell into this captivity was because of idolatry. God kept warning them over and over and over and over, stop your idol worship or I will stop you. So they didn't stop. They just kept getting worse and worse. So he put them in captivity, and he said, from this moment on, you Jews will never, ever have a problem with idol worship ever again. You're going to learn your lesson. I mean, everybody in here has been a parent, right? And so are there ever times where you tell your children, this is the way it's going to be, and you're going to learn from this? I mean, I think all of us can say that.
It don't always work, but we say it.
Yeah, and you fully intend, right? I mean, you try to make it as abundantly clear as possible. This is why I'm doing this. This is what, this is what I want you to learn, right? That's what God did with these captivities. So Chronicles and Kings were written, the books were written as history books. They're inspired by God. Ezra, Nehemiah, all these people, when they came out of captivity and they came back to their land, do you think that they just, boom, automatically resumed worship to God? Do you think that they've been waiting 185 years and for one group and 70 years for the other? You think they've been waiting all that time, just sitting there saying, oh man, I can't wait to get back to the temple. I can't wait to get back to the temple. Well, the temple, when they got captured, what do you think the enemies did to the temple?
They destroyed it.
Destroyed it. Okay, so when they do get out of captivity and they are allowed to go home, not everybody leaves. There's a whole bunch of people that say, nah, we don't even want to go home. There's other people that say, nah, I'm too lazy. Nah, I like my Babylonian life.
Maybe it's good living, but they know they did have something.
In that 100 day a year, you had
Huh?
They think they had something, but when they left, they didn't think
Yeah.
they had nothing.
Right. There was a lot of people that just didn't have any hope, so they just didn't move. So
in that 180 years, you had at least 2 to 3 generations was producing. Some of them were producing children, and most of them people didn't know anything better.
exactly, they had no idea how to worship God, who God was, what their history was, because you think that they were allowed to carry around the Ark of the Covenant? No.
They didn't know nothing about it.
Exactly, and so if God's people is allowed to come back to there in the year 536, when the King Cyrus he comes in and smacks Babylonia around. He's the king of Medo-Persia. He comes around, smacks Babylon around, and says, "I'm the boss now." And he says, "Oh yeah, you Jews, you go on ahead. Y'all go on back home." When most of them do come back home, or I can't even say most, when a large group of people go back home, they sit there And it takes them over 20 years to rebuild the temple. You guys remember when we studied the minor prophets of Haggai and Zechariah? When we did those lessons on them, that's what we were talking about when we did that. Haggai and Zechariah, the whole point to their books is, hey, we've been given a gift. God delivered us out of captivity at the time He said He was going to do it, and He's blessed us with the ability to come back home. Let's build the temple, and He's given us a blank check. From the king, this new king of Medo-Persia, He's saying He'll pay for us to worship our God like we want to, like we need to. What's taking y'all so long? It took them they got started, and in the first 4 years they got the base layer set, but then it took them 16 more years of procrastination. It took them 16 years to finish it. So 20 years later, they finally get their temple. All of that tells us that these generations that were in captivity, when they came out, everything was not hunky-dory. Everything was not candy and sunshine and rainbows and kittens and rabbits. I mean,
Well, their tools are not like today's either.
Oh no, they were extremely advanced. This was after the first temple had been built. Like what we're reading here in 2 Samuel, that's before the temple's built. What we're talking about with the captivity is after. When the first temple was built, when Solomon when he finished the temple, David had paid, and we're going to see this. David had prepared it. He had paid all the best woodworkers. He had paid all the best craftsmen, all the best architects, all the best blacksmiths. He had paid everyone who was the best of the best in the world, no matter what country they were from. He had paid them in full ahead of time for their skill and their labor. And he said, hey, my God said I'm not allowed to build this temple, so I'm going to pay you guys, and I want you, and he paid them so much money. He paid them so much money that their children and their children's children who followed in their parents' footsteps and their crafts and stuff. Whenever the time came that, it could have been 700 years later, those people would still have been, added to the temple, and, added their parts to the temple. But here's the most fascinating thing. Has anybody in here ever seen how a house is built? You have the saws, and you have the nowadays we have power tools, like you're saying.
I'm saying they don't take as long to build a building.
Here, you want to know something fascinating? You couldn't. The Bible tells us that when the temple was built, you didn't hear one saw cut grain. You didn't hear one hammer smack a nail into a board. You didn't hear anything. Why? Because everything was already pre-cut and pre-built, and all they had to do was put it together. Isn't that fascinating?
They have that now.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
kits that you can buy for
Exactly.
homes, a lot of cabinets.
Exactly.
They're probably more expensive.
Exactly. And this was the most fantastic looking building that I've ever heard of being crafted. I mean, it had gold, it had silver, it had like the best cedar wood, like everything. Everything was the best. And it was all for God. And that temple that's the one that got destroyed when they got taken into captivity. So then when they come back, and they have no idea how to worship God. They barely have any people at all. The people that they do have are completely lazy and don't want to do anything, and or disheartened and downtrodden or afraid because they're afraid of the Samaritans or some other people coming in and attacking them while they're building the temple. They make all the excuses in the world. When they finally do build the second temple, they compare it to the first one. They're like, "Oh man, it's nothing like what we read about." Some people had been old enough to remember the first temple before captivity, and they were just kind of like. But First and Second Chronicles was written for those people, and First and Second Kings were written for those people who came out of captivity. If we were to have a war in this country where, it lasted, let's just say 70 years. 70 years in this country. And we were just like this captivity. What would we do when peace came 70 years later? What would we teach our children? How would we just skip over the last 70 years?
You're saying 70.
Yeah. Like if we had 70 years.
The people would go into that would be gone in their first 40, then another generation.
Yeah, no, I'm saying like put our country in their position.
You have to tell them. It'd be like
Yeah.
history.
We would have to give them a history lesson, right? We would have to teach them what led up to this past 70 years of war and, horrible times. We would have to give them a history lesson on what happened before that, right? What was our country? Where were our people before this? That's what Chronicles and Kings are all about. It's a history lesson. So a lot of times when we're reading through the Bible, we got our yearly Bible reading plan, and we're reading, and we'll get done with a couple of these books, and then we'll go to 1st and 2nd Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Kings. They're like exact copies of each other. Well, that's because they're history books. They're to teach the Jews where they came from, why they had to do the things that they did, the way that they did them, and couldn't depart. So a lot of times we see in these books, it's just repeat information after repeat information. But when we remember, this is the only lifeline that they had to their former selves. Like without these, they had no idea who they were as a people. You know what I mean? Like that's like in this country, it being so long that the people, in that war, let's just say we ended it and we were still America. That would be like people saying, "What is this flag with 13 stripes and 50 stars? What is this?" We would have to teach them, right? If people had no idea about who they were as an identity, a national identity, that's what we would have to do.
It's like one woman destroyed prayer in church.
One woman.
One woman.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're gonna take God off the money. We ain't strong enough to tell our kids like them babies about God. It's gonna be extreme, not like them go work.
Exactly. That's exactly what we're talking about. Is even if there isn't a period of war, like what in the example I was given, that your example is perfect, because what are we seeing now? We're seeing generation after generation after generation growing up without God, and they have all these questions about their life, their place in the universe, their place in this world. What's the point? Is what they ask themselves. Am I a male or am I a female? Am I gay or am I straight? We see all of the, who am I questions. What's the point questions? And it's because how many generations have we had just in this country who are growing up without God? You see what I mean? And so we need, this is what our job as Christians is to bring God's word to the people and teach them about what's important and why we do the things that we do. So.
One woman can destroy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna do my part. I'm not gonna stand up and say, I
Yeah.
don't believe in homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in legalizing marijuana for medical purposes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not gonna, but I'm not
Yeah.
by myself, but I'm not gonna stand for something that's wrong.
I like how you said that. One person can destroy, one person can also build. If one person, true or false, if I took a hammer and I held it in my hand, and we had another guy here standing right next to me and took a hammer in his hand, and his whole purpose was to destroy something, and my whole purpose was to build something with that with my hammer. Could we both do that? He could destroy something quite easily, and it'd be quick and easy for him in most cases. And it would take, but we could take the hammer and it would take longer, it would take more work, and we'd have to be more patient and know what we're doing, but we could rebuild it, so that's what we got to do. So, all right, so let's read verses 6 through 10. So who was the last one to read verse 5? All right, so you, Joe, do you want to get verse 6, and then Frank, do you want to get 7? Okay, go ahead.
And the king and his men went to Jerusalem unto the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, which spake unto David, saying, Except thou take away the blind and the lame, thou shalt not come in hither. Thinking David cannot come in hither.
Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion. The same is the city of David.
And David said on that day, Whosoever getteth up to the gutter and smiteth the Jebusites and the lame and the blind that are hated of David's soul, he shall be chief and captain. Wherefore they said, The blind and the lame shall not come into the house.
So David dwelt in the fort, and called it the city of David. And David built a round about from Millo and inward.
And David went on and grew great, and the Lord God of hosts was with him.
Hiram, king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees and carpenters and masons, and they built David a house.
And David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for his people Israel's sake.
David took him 4 concubines and wives out of Jerusalem. After he was come to Hebron, and there were yet some sons and daughters born to David.
These be the names of those that were born to him in Jerusalem: Shemaiah, Shabab, and Nathan, and Solomon.
Ibhar also, and Elushua, and Nepheg, and Japhiah, and Elishama, and Eladiah, and Eliphalet. And so that was, so we covered several verses there, so let's go back and look at some of these. All right, so David, a bunch of people came down to David now that Ishbosheth is dead, and says, hey, we want to make you king over everything, right? Okay, so David says, all right, this is good. It's unfortunate what happened to Ishbosheth. I didn't want that to happen, but okay, I'll take my rightful place as king now. So if he's going to take his rightful place as king, where's he going to live? In the city of the Lord, Zion, which is
Jerusalem.
right. Okay, what's so difficult about Jerusalem? What makes it difficult to take Jerusalem if Jerusalem doesn't want you in? What makes it so difficult to just walk in if they don't want you in?
It's location.
Its location. Tell me about its location.
It's up.
It's up.
It's higher, so it's
Mm-hmm.
harder to come into the flat area.
Now, does it have? You could just shoot arrows in, and burn some of the buildings, right? Or burn down the walls, right? Because they're like paper thin, right? No. Tell me about the walls of Jerusalem. Do they have holes in the walls? No. They're huge walls on top of around a huge city on a big hill in the mountains. And so if you're looking at a mountain, you say, I want that city. I want to be there. And you start going up and you realize, it doesn't look so big down here. But then you get up there and it's like, wow, this is a lot bigger than I thought. These walls, I can't just climb over these walls. And even if I did, they would just throw me, kill me.
You down pretty quick from
Right.
the top,
Right.
but you can't shoot them.
Right. It's literally, you guys ever heard that? You're fighting an uphill battle? You ever heard that expression? Yeah, this is what we're talking about. So some people come and they say, hey, we want you to be king, so come on up to Jerusalem. He gets to Jerusalem and some other people are like, nah, we don't want you. Never mind. Some other people say, no, this isn't going to, good luck. Good luck getting us. We're not going to let you in until, unless you can do these miraculous things, right? Okay, so David said what here? He tells his people what? Well, he says whosoever getteth up to the gutter and smiteth the Jebusites and the lame and the blind that are hated of David's soul, he shall be the chief and captain. Okay, so when he said, what is he saying to his military here? Anybody that can make his way into that city and take it for me, I'm going to make that man, that whoever it is, I'm going to make that person the chief and the captain of all my military. Pretty illustrious position. Who had that position before? Joab, right? Okay, so instead of killing Joab, we now know that he's still alive. We do know he's still alive. He didn't kill his nephew. But we do know he punished him by taking away his position. How do we know that Joab is not the captain over the military right now? Because David just said to everyone, hey, the position is open to be filled, right? So just because the Bible didn't say, that it didn't explicitly tell us that he fired him from his position, it does tell us right here, through the context of the verse, it tells us that the position's open, right? Okay, so who do you guys think is going to be gutsy enough to go in there and try to take this city? You guys ever heard what's that a man? Oh, maybe somebody who's the itsy bitsy spider. You guys ever heard? You guys remember the itsy bitsy spider? Well, what did he do? He crawled up the water spout, right? Okay, so you guys ever heard of a person doing that? You guys want to learn who the real itsy bitsy spider was? Mm-hmm. It was Joab. Mm-hmm. What did he do? He said, "Oh, look, water. Here's a little tunnel under the city that leads under the city. Oh, look, this is where they get their water. It's a well and all that. Oh, look, it's just big enough for me to fit. Oh, look, I can climb. Oh, look, I'm at the top of the well. Oh, look, I killed all these people. Oh, look, David said in front of everybody, whoever does this gets to be the captain. Oh, look, I got my job back." Joab is the itsy bitsy spider. Oh, yeah. Because he said, if the king said,
was taken away from him, but they gave it back to him because
he earned it back. If the king said in front of everybody, the person that does this gets this, do you think it would look good on David's part to say, oh, well, I did say that, but yeah, it wouldn't look good on his part. Okay, so Joab being alive is good because he was able to help David do something nobody else was able to do. He was able to go and conquer them by going up the water spout, literally. But it's bad because this power-hungry, bloodthirsty, revenge-minded person is now back in charge of the military, right? So we see some good, we see some bad. Okay, so so let's see. We read through 11 through 16 as well, and so we see that you guys remember how when we were talking about the building of the temple, how David had the best of the best resources. Well, look here in verses 11 through 12. And Hiram, king of Tyre. Tyre was an interesting city. Tyre was actually a city that was in two places at once. It's weird to think about, but Tyre had. If I'm gonna try to draw it over here. If this is the land, like here's a whole bunch of land and here's the ocean. Here's Tyre. So they had a land one where they could send out stuff, on caravans, and they could go in all different directions on the land. But here's also there's an island out here called Tyre. And whenever this land would get attacked, instead of just sitting there they would have people watching, and whenever somebody would come in and try to take their land of Tyre, they would just move everything over here on the boats to their little island fortress, and then they would just keep doing their trades out. So Tyre was a very interesting place, and that's pretty smart if you ask me. If you're gonna have a city, you might as well it's kind of like having a backup city. Let's just say Wilson gets flooded or hit by a tornado or something. Well, that'd be like saying, oh, that's okay. We got another city right down the road. We'll just we got this. I mean, that'd be cool, But Tyre was a lot bigger than Wilson, so a lot more people. All right, so David, the king of Tyre, sent messengers to David, and cedar trees, and carpenters, and masons, and they built David a house. And David perceived that the Lord had established him king over Israel, and that he had exalted his kingdom for the people of Israel's sake. So David sees this as what? He said he's looking around, he becomes king in Jerusalem. How many other people to this point have been able to conquer Jerusalem by force? Not many. Not many. So now, all these other nations, they don't like Jerusalem. Give me 2 reasons why nations don't like Jerusalem, the city. Why would other nations not like Jerusalem? Just throw something out there. Well,
It's defendable.
yeah, it's defendable, right? People don't like to see undefeated opponents, right? Like when people look at teams and the New England Patriots a couple years ago. You guys remember how they were 18-0? They went and they played 18 games. They played all of the regular season, 16 games, and they played 2 playoff games in the NFL. And they completely destroyed some opponents, and some they barely squeaked by. Fact is, they had not been beat. Well, what happened in the Super Bowl? How many people do you think were Patriots fans versus how many people do you think were Giants fans? People wanted to see the Patriots fall. Some people wanted to see them go undefeated, but for the most part, people don't like to see, unless you're on that team, people don't like to see undefeated opponents. That's one reason why people hated Jerusalem, because they were jealous of them, right?
Okay, but isn't that the place where they went for the yearly feast? That was later on.
Yeah, the Jews, yeah, but I'm talking about this king of Tyre and these other Gentile nations. That leads into another reason why they would hate Jerusalem. Not only are they not beatable, but Tyre, what kind of nation did we just say they were? They were a very economic nation, right? Very economic minded. Not only did they have a land, a place where they could send things out by land, but they also had the naval, the trade by sea as well. Tyre, as great as they were with trading, where's the place that's in the? Let me look up a map here. Let's see. Jerusalem. Oops. I typed that wrong. All right. Oops. Where is the place that's constantly in the middle of everywhere? All these big major players in the world, all these great world empires. Where is the place that is right there in the middle? Jerusalem. All right. Let me. There we go. I'm trying to find a map here, but it might not have something. There we go. All right, here we go. Trying to get it big for everybody. All right, Egypt is down here. Syria, Babylon, Greece, Italy, all these other nations to the north. Egypt and all these other nations down to the south, the Chaldees, the Tigris and Euphrates River is over here, and right there in the middle, I guess this thing's not going to pop up for some reason. Yeah, that's weird. I wish it would pop up, but all of these nations have to go through Jerusalem. Because the way the mountains are and all these things, if they want to go from here and conquer here, they have to go through Jerusalem. Now, most people would want to. My map's not working, so I'm guessing we're not going to be able to do that. But Jerusalem can't be conquered, that's going to make people mad because they're going to be trying to take over something down here, and they're just wanting to march through and take everything on their way. Then they reach Jerusalem, and Jerusalem's sitting up there on the hill just like, no, you can't take us. You might as well just get on down the road. Well, what else does a nation in the middle of all these other nations benefit from? Trading, right? Jerusalem was the premier place for trading. As you know, Tyre is jealous of them. That's why in those captivities, when Jerusalem falls and goes into captivity, the Bible explicitly tells us about all these other nations who were happy that Jerusalem fell. Tyre rejoiced because they said, finally, Jerusalem fell, so now we get to have all of their customers are going to come to us. That's what Tyre, the king of Tyre, thought. Well, the Bible compares Tyre to being a boat filled with all of these, and it's out on the ocean. It's filled with all these wonderful things, and then it sinks. Why would they do that? Because that's what happens. They had all these trade goods, and they had this island out there with all this trade by sea, and then their nation fell. So Tyre, David sees the king of Tyre sees David take over Jerusalem, and what does he immediately do for David? He builds him a house with what? Okay. Expensive or cheap?
Expensive.
Okay. Tyre and the Jews, they don't necessarily get along. Why would a Gentile buy expensive, lavish things and have them built and pay for the people to come in and build them? Why would he do that for David? Goodwill, and also fear, right? He's like exactly what you said. He's investing. He's showing a sign of goodwill, and he's trying to show him, hey, we can be friends. We can be friends. Why would he say that? Why would he be afraid of David?
David's undefeated.
David's undefeated, and he just took the untakeable city, right? Now, not everybody knows how he took the city, because if everybody knew, then everybody would be able to do it, right? So David, to everyone else, to put yourself in these other nations' shoes, they see David come in and just like that say, okay, I'm going to take my place as king, but you guys shut your doors in my face, so now I'm going to take you. I was just going to walk in, now I'm going to march in. And then he does. So all these other nations are just like, whoa, this guy's for real. And so he buys him a lavish house and all this stuff. So what does David do? How does David perceive this king of Tyre buying him all these things?
God's blessing.
Yeah, he's thinking, God has blessed me so much. God has blessed me so much because I want to serve the people. God is blessing me with these things. Now, is it true God could have used the king of Tyre to shower these blessings on David? Oh yeah, but it's also equally true that king of Tyre had an earthly reason, to be a little afraid. Okay, let's see. Now let's look at 17 through 25. Okay, so now he's got his new house. How many kids did he get? Several, right? And that was on top of the kids that he already had. Yeah, he's got his own army now. He's got enough for a baseball team, ain't that right? Actually, I don't know how many people are supposed to be on a baseball team.
That's 12.
Is it 12? Is
12
it?
names right there.
Yeah, plus the 6 that he had
Plus
earlier. How many is on a baseball team at one time on the field? Is it 11 or something? 9? Okay, 11 is football. Okay, gotcha. See, I'm learning. All right, David battles the Philistines here in 17 through 25. Okay, so I'll read verse 17. But when the Philistines heard that they had anointed David king over Israel, all the Philistines came up to seek David, and David heard of it and went down to the hole. So it's your verse 18. Well, I guess she's falling asleep almost. Okay.
Yeah, I started reading that and she started reading. It doesn't matter.
Either way, I'm going to get a bottle of water.
The Philistines also came and spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim.
And David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go to the Philistines, wilt thou deliver them into thy hand? And the Lord said unto David, Go up, and for I will doubtless deliver the Philistines into thy hand.
And David came to Bahurim, and David smote them there and said, The Lord hath broken forth upon mine enemies before me as the breach of waters. Therefore he called the name of the place Baal-Perazim.
There they left their images, and David and his men burned them.
The Philistines came up yet again, spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim.
And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, Thou shalt not go up, but fetch a compass behind them, and come up upon them over against the mulberry trees.
And let it be when thou hearest the sound of go in the tops of the mulberry trees, that then thou shalt bestir thyself, for then shall the Lord go out before thee to smite the host of the Philistines.
And David did so as the Lord had commanded him. The strong Philistines from Gilgal until thou come to Gaza.
All right, so let's look at 17. Let's go back to 17 real quick. Okay, like we said, we saw how one other nation reacted. We saw how Tyre reacted, and that was, hey, let's get in good with King David before he decides he wants to take us or gets mad at us or whatever. Let's show him a gesture of goodwill. What do these other people say? These other Philistines, they come up, and where had David just been?
The Philistines.
A couple years before this, right? I say just been because it seems like we just read it, but about seven and a half years before, he had just been in Philistine territory, been allied with them at least, partially. He'd been, I guess you could say, allied. He was telling them he was their ally and killing them secretly. But the fact is, he had just been there, relatively recently. But we can start seeing how things change that quick, right? All right, so somebody tell me, now look at that's 17. Now look at verses 18 and 19. Somebody tell me about those verses. Or somebody read letter A on here.
Deliver him to the Philistines.
Huh?
He was going to be delivered to the Philistines.
And so,
He inquired of the Lord first, like he always has.
said, shall I go up to the Philistines? And then he asked him, will you give these Philistines and put them in my hand? Will you give them to me? Basically asking for a victory, or if he would, if it's the Lord's will that he be victorious is what he's asking. And the Lord said what to him? He said, sit or go?
Go up.
Go up.
Said,
For I will kind of deliver them, or what does it say? Doubtless. So that shows the assurity, right? Okay, now David came to Baal-Perazim, and David smote them there, and said, The Lord hath broken forth upon mine enemies before me, as what?
breach of water.
Okay. Therefore, he called the name of that place Baal Perazim, and they left their images, and David and his men did what with them? Burned them. Okay, so who did he fight?
So the Philistines.
And they left their what when they got beat? Mm-hmm. And so, how important are images and idols to Philistines? Very, very.
They idolize.
Exactly. And so, they're very materialistic, right? And how do we know that? What are some things that we remember from 1 Samuel that prove that they're a materialistic, trophy-minded, idol-minded?
They killed David's men, Saul, and
Yeah.
they threw their bodies in and pinned them on their wall.
Mhm. And they paraded around the Ark of the Covenant. Remember that? They paraded around the Ark, and they, like you said just now, they pinned those bodies of Saul and his son on the wall of their religious center. So look at here, they're very materialistic. You guys remember the what happened when the Ark of the Covenant, when they had the Ark? Not only were they parading it around, saying, "Ha ha, look what we got." When they set it down in their temple,
It's the items themselves in there.
and so exactly, and so you guys remember what happened to the Philistine god?
It fell.
It fell. Well, what did they do? They put it back up.
They put it back up.
And what happened the next night?
It fell again, but this time it broke.
Exactly. What broke on it?
The hands and the feet.
Yeah, the head and the hands, right? So, the two things that you need to worship, to make and worship an idol is the head to think and hands to do it. And so the two things that broke.
That was big.
And so exactly. So they're a materialistic people. And so how telling is it that David prayed to God and said, "Hey, what do you want me to do? Go or not go?" God says, "Go." Okay, David's like, are we going to be victorious or are we going to lose? You'll be, don't worry about that. He says, "Doubtless I will deliver them to you." And how telling is it that David was relying upon God for all this, but when he won, what did he do to the Philistines' idols and images? Burned them. How telling is that? That's. Let's see. The place was named Baal Perazim, for the Philistines abandoned their images there, which David and his men burned. By burning these images, they certainly took them away. The parallel passage states that they burned the images, and there's a parallel passage. You guys remember earlier what we talked about in Chronicles? How Chronicles is a lot of repeat information. Well, when we read the account in Chronicles, it says, "And when they had left their gods there, David gave a commandment, and they were burned with fire." Israel had already been commanded to destroy the altars of idols whenever they captured them.
They didn't even get the gold off of them or anything.
No.
That would be abomination.
Yeah. Exactly. And so taking these passages into consideration and what they're, the way that they were supposed to go about, when was Deuteronomy written? Who wrote that?
Moses.
Who came first, Moses or Samuel?
Moses.
Yeah, who came first, Moses or Saul?
Moses.
So when Saul was supposed to destroy all of the people of the enemy nation, and he was supposed to destroy all the property and all the everything, and he did not destroy it, and he said, "Oh, these things we could use them for sacrifices." Do you think that he was spitting right there in the face of God, who had already said these things right here? I think so. Because if they were not even allowed to take gold or silver, that stuff's valuable. If they weren't even able to take those things from the idols that they burned or the altars that they burned, then what's his face, Saul over here says, oh, well, we can keep these sheeps. Oh, well, we can keep these animals alive. Yeah, and I'm just sitting there, and then Samuel says, well, you say that you did your job and you wiped everything out, but why do I hear the bleating of sheep and oxen in my ear? And so David handles this situation how compared to Saul? When David wins, he does what?
He does what he's
He burns it all, don't keep anything.
Mm-hmm. Now this is a different tactic than what's used for warfare today. The Russians are a fan of what's called slash and burn warfare. What they do is they bait people. They say, come on in. If somebody come on into our border. We'll just, and they pretend to keep backing up. And you look at Russian warfare, what they do is as they back up, they destroy their own farms. They destroy their own towns. They burn them to the ground as their enemies track them, keep following them. How in the world are they able to win a war when they're burning all their crops, when they're burning all these things? Well, Russia's an awful big place. They pull their enemies farther and farther away from their support, and they're burning all the food and supplies on the way. Russia has got their supplies. They keep backing up into supplies and using them before they burn the place. And then their enemies are following along in what? Wastelands. And so how are you supposed to lead an army if it doesn't have anything to eat or a place to stay? And so that's a different type of warfare than what they're burning things, slash and burn, than what we're seeing here. David, he wins a battle and then he burns the stuff he's supposed to burn. Whereas different countries today will burn stuff in order to win, right? So, yeah, the Vietnam War, yeah. Agent Orange, napalm, all these things that they would rain down from the sky to burn the jungles down and everything. They would just wholesale just wipe out a whole place if they thought that one person was there. All right.
Well, a lot of these veterans have that Agent Orange.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Agent Orange has caused a lot more problems for Americans than it has for the Vietnamese. I'll tell you that much. Okay, now the Philistines, verse 22, came up yet again, and they spread themselves in the valley of Rephaim. And when David inquired of the Lord, he said, the Lord said, what?
I shall not go up.
Don't go up this time. So first time he says, go, do it now. You got this. So David does it. He's got it. He wins. Next time he prays. Could he have just said, okay, well, the Lord said, go up and take all the Philistines, and he could have just said that, and he could have gone into this battle and said, well, the Lord already said, go up and take them, so I don't need to pray again. He could have done that, but instead, what does he do? He prays. He prays and puts the situation in the Lord's hands and asks him what he should do. And what does the Lord say this time? Don't go up. Why? What does he tell him to do? He says, circle around them, right? He says, but fetch a compass behind them. You guys remember what we talked about? Compass. Is he talking about that little thing with the little needle and points towards north? What's he talking about? Mm-hmm. Exactly. Now, aren't the Philistines just going to see them coming? Aren't they just going to see them circling around and then just defend themselves? Why would God tell them to do this? That's just, that's crazy. Well, what else did he say? Finish the verse 23. Wait a second. He says circle around them, but stay in the trees. Stay in the forest where they don't see you. You guys ever seen The Lord of the Rings? Anybody seen there? Has anybody?
Yeah, everybody's seen it a while, but...
Nobody seen it? I'm the only nerd in here? Seriously?
Oh, I've seen part of it. I just never did remember all of it.
have you guys ever seen any types of movies with war in it, where the people, they stayed in the tree line, and like one nation comes out and they're like, I thought this is where we were supposed to battle. This is the day we're supposed to fight, right? This is the place, and they're out there in the open.
Hiding in the trees.
Yeah.
But they're in the area.
Right.
The trees are so big. They
Mhm.
don't let nobody move them in there.
Right, and so yeah, exactly. And so one side is out there like, completely exposed, and the other one is in the trees, and they're just waiting. Okay, how do we know what is the signal God said to David was going to be? What did He say the signal was going to be for them to charge?
Sound of a going and tossing along the tree.
Okay, so God gives him this is a military plan for battle. This is a battle tactic from God Himself. How successful do you think this is going to be if they do it like they're supposed to?
Should be successful.
God said,
He knows.
circle or I'm going to,
Pay attention.
God says your enemies are going to be, coming straight, making a beeline for you this way. Instead of taking them on head on, which would be dumb, He says, circle around.
So they
Stay
would
in the
be more or
trees.
less like behind them.
Yeah.
And they would be thinking they were from the other side.
You ever seen Jurassic Park?
Uh-huh.
You guys remember that part where they say the raptor, they'll make noise over here and distract you,
Uh-huh.
but then the other one, the
Right.
one you don't see coming, is the one that gets you. The one that comes from behind or from the side. That's what they're saying. These enemies are going to be looking straight ahead, and they're not even going to see the arrow come and hit them in the neck from the side, or the sword come and get them from the back. They're not going to see that. It was really weird. Amanda and I were watching. It was a creepy sort of information that we learned yesterday. We were watching a documentary on these massive swarms of different creatures that appear in nature. Like there were billions of mice that appear every couple of years in Australia. They'll get a lot of rainfall, and so more food's produced, and then the mice and all that stuff, they just breed out of control. The predators can't even keep up with eating them. That's how many there are. Then there was a couple other things, but then at the end we saw a locust swarm, and we were interested. We were interested to learn that the reason why those locusts go so crazy and they just swarm from place to place, and why they're so effective and so precise in their movements, is because they crave protein. And for a locust, what's the nearest source of protein? The locust in front of you. And so the ones in front have no idea where they're going. They're just trying to run away from the ones behind them who are trying to eat them. And then the ones who are like second in line, they're following the ones who are first because they want to eat them. And they're running as fast as they can to try to eat the ones in front of them and run from the ones behind them. And so the reason why I bring this up is because these Philistines are just like the locusts. They're going to be focused on what's ahead of them. They're not going to be thinking about anything else. And so these Philistines are going to get taken. And God, how does God say? Does He say wait to see the whites of their eyes or something like we would say now, or something? No, He says, hey, I'm going to send you a signal from the heavens. I'm going to make these trees blow. I'm going to send a noise, and you're going to know it. You guys ever seen that where they say, well, what's the sign? Oh, you'll know.
Particular sound.
Yeah. And God says He's going to step in and He's going to make this happen. I mean, isn't that great? I mean, so that's 2 Samuel chapter 5. And so we'll end here for today. And we'll start with 2 Samuel 6. So,
You want to keep going?
yeah.
Like when I was home, when we had to go get the cows. They
Mhm.
usually hide behind trees. You couldn't see them either.
Yeah.
And you have to look, and they won't make a sound.
And it's hard to believe. How do you miss a cow, right? But the trees provide such good cover.
And they won't make a bit of racket.
It's like Zeke when he's out deer hunting. You ever been deer hunting out in the woods? And you'll just be looking in the same spot, and you'll be like, there ain't nothing there. And then a second later, you hear it move, and it's like, I didn't even see that deer. It's like, what in the world? But all right, so we'll take a break.